Hello, my name is Travis Russell, and I'm a Jesuit from the West Coast province who works for the Jesuit Conference in Washington, D.C. at the Office of Justice and Ecology. Now, I know what you're thinking, so don't hate on the Seahawks. It's undeniable, Pete Carroll has got great hair. No, what you're really thinking is, what's the Office of Justice and Ecology? It's the advocacy wing of the Jesuits, part of our commitment to living out the gospel for social justice. First, a quick civics lesson is necessary. Important lesson number one. We can take to the streets and protest all we want, but eventually, to create a more just society, laws must change. And for that, we must understand how our government works. We have a federalist system of government, which means the power is shared and decentralized. Many assume the federal government can wave a magic wand and everything will change. That's simply not true, especially when it comes to things like criminal justice. Much of the power for change resides with states and local governments. For example, did you know that there are almost 18,000 police departments in the United States, each with their own policies and procedures? So with our system of government, one which states have rights, it's hard for Congress to wave their magic wand and spell change. Besides, there's no such thing as a magic wand. Most of Congress's power consists of funding. That is, how much money they give to states and local communities, which is traditionally referred to as Congress's power of the purse. States and local communities rely heavily on federal money to fund police and other social programs, which is the primary way Congress incentivizes change. You might be thinking, if Congress can't fix it, then what can I do? There's a lot you can do. The good news about our federalist system of government is that often the most impactful change happens at home. That is, by getting involved at the local level, you can create more change than if Congress waved their mythical magic wand. So get involved. Now, enough of the boring stuff. What should you be paying attention to? What's hot and what's not? The future of policing is sizzling hot. After the killing of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and tragically many others, we were once again awakened to the fact that everyone's experience of law enforcement is not the same, especially if you're a person of color, which can often be deadly. This is a well-documented fact. Therefore, we are seeing a call for change. There are three basic positions, and although there are differences, there's a lot of overlap. Position number one, reform the police. Reformers presuppose that police have an essential role in creating a more just society. They acknowledge the current system is flawed, but see it as salvageable. Policing needs to change in some ways. And so they advocate for two things simultaneously: enough police to keep violent crime low, and police who are well-trained enough and tightly constrained enough not to abuse their power. Unlike the defund movement, reformers want to maintain or increase spending levels while adopting and enforcing policies prohibiting things such as profiling and discrimination. Position number two, defund the police. Defunders support redirecting some money from police departments to social programming, insisting that current levels of spending increase violence and corruption rather than solving it. Although not all defunders present the same proposals, defunding exists as a suite of public policy ideas premised on investments in individual well-being, community infrastructure, alternative first responder services, and divestment of the use of lethal force. Position number three, abolish the police. Abolitionists want to create alternatives to policing by investing in social programs. Long-term abolitionists do not believe police to be necessary, even for violent crimes. They contend that concepts such as crime and violence have been constructed by people who have power. Violence, then, is structural, and the social costs associated with the real functions of police outweigh any benefit they provide. The one point of agreement in debate is that we can do better, and that we shouldn't expect police to handle every societal problem. For example, We often call on police to confront public health matters such as addiction, mental illness, and homelessness. By themselves, these are not crimes. Rather, they are symptoms of social injustices that society has failed to confront. So instead of calling the police to handle these societal problems, we might instead call a social worker who can not only handle a problem, but also treat the person with respect, affirming their human dignity. One last thought: safe and equitable communities that respect the dignity of all. This should be the first jumping off point for discerning the future of policing. The debate over policing is about so much more than the role of law enforcement. It is also about equity and the social conditions in which people live. As Pope Francis has said, when a society, whether local, national, or global, is willing to leave a part of itself on the fringes, no political programs or resources spent on law enforcement or surveillance systems can indefinitely guarantee tranquility. COVID-19, prisons, and reentry. Another hot one. Did you know if you were incarcerated, you would be 3 times more likely to die from COVID-19 and 5 times more likely to become infected than the general population? It's true. The inhumane conditions of detention centers are a petri dish for the virus. So even if someone doesn't have a life sentence, they may die in custody while waiting to be released. That is why many are calling for compassionate release, meaning that the government should correct the wrongs of the past by releasing people who are no longer a threat to society. We know that many people who are now in prison are there because of unjust mandatory sentencing laws, especially those dealing with drug offenses, which has led to the highest incarceration rate of any country in the world. Those prisoners have served their time and no longer deserve to be there. But what happens when a prisoner is released? A prison sentence leaves a permanent scar, denying released access to jobs, assistance with food and housing, and in many cases, voting rights. This treatment does the opposite of rehabilitation. Instead, it traps people who have been incarcerated and their families in a cycle of poverty and oppression, often leading them to reoffend. The death penalty. Sadly, after 17 years, our government has resumed federal executions, which in the past few months, the government has carried out more federal executions than in any other comparable time in the past 70 years. The Catechism condemns capital punishment, calling it an attack on human dignity and deeming it inadmissible in all cases. No exceptions. We know from many studies that the death penalty is not a deterrent to crime. In fact, if anything, it perpetuates the cycle of violence, therefore making society less safe. We also know that it is prone to racial bias and that many innocent people of color have been executed. Let me read a note from the lawyer of Dustin Hawken, one of the men that was executed this year. Dustin Hawken was redeemed. He recognized and repented for the crimes he had committed. He spent his time in prison atoning for them. With Father Mark, Sister Betty, Cardinal Tobin, and other religious mentors, Dustin worked every day of the Catholic faith that was at the center of his life. During his time in prison, he cared for everyone he came in contact with: guards, counselors, medical staff, his fellow inmates, and his legal team. Over the years, he grew incredibly close to his family, becoming a true father, son, brother, and friend. There was no reason for the government to kill him in haste or at all. In any case, they failed. The Dustin Hawken they wanted to kill is long gone. The man they killed today was a human being who could have spent the rest of his days helping others and further redeeming himself. May he rest in peace. If that's not a reason for abolishing the death penalty, I don't know what is. Finally, the issue of private prisons. It should go without saying that profiting from other people's misery is wrong. If you think about it, private prisons operate like a hotel, although their customers cannot complain because no one will listen to them. They want their beds full, they want their guests to stay as long as possible, and they want them to be repeat customers, and so have no incentive to rehabilitate them. They also need a pipeline of customers to feed their business. Therefore, improving society to stop the flow of the prisoner pipeline is against their self-interest. Again, it goes without saying that profiting from other people's misery is wrong. As people of faith, we cannot end in despair. We must end in hope. That is why we must advocate for change and look for alternatives to the current criminal justice system. One such alternative is restorative justice, which seeks to heal the relationships that have been injured by crime. Restorative justice understands that we live in a web of relationships, and that when one relationship is broken, the entire web is weakened. It's the principle of Ubuntu. I am because we are. And as a society, we are responsible to one another, meaning that when a crime happens, we must build back the web by mending the broken relationships. As both a Jesuit and someone who works in the field of policy, I believe our faith has something important to contribute to these debates. And so I would like to leave you with 3 points to keep in mind when considering issues of justice. Number 1, if our engagement with these issues lead us to cynicism and despair, then chances are something is wrong, and we need to pursue a different course. We are fundamentally a people of hope, and that fact should carry over to every part of our lives, especially in matters of justice. Number 2, St. Ignatius tells us to always assume the best of people, giving them the benefit of the doubt. I think this takes on an even greater importance today when things are so polarized. We must keep in mind that though we may disagree on policy, we all want a better society. The disagreement is over how we get there. Nevertheless, we all want a better society, so always assume the best of people. Number 3, we must lead with love and mercy. This is the way of Jesus. It may not be the way of the world, but as disciples, we should stand out and lead the way. This is not always a popular or comfortable position to be in. In fact, many times it will leave us standing at the margins with those who have been excluded and ridiculed. But this is where Jesus is at, and if we stand there long enough, we will find him. Thank you for your time. I hope this has been helpful. God bless.